Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's roughly about a mile to the east from here. And once he was arrested, the religious leaders, they brought him to Caiaphas' palace. It's where he would have stood the first of a series of trials that he would endure that particular night. As he met in front of the Jewish religious leaders, there were all kinds of illegal things they did according to their own religious rules. According to their own law, they couldn't arrest a prisoner on a bribe. They couldn't hold a trial at night. They couldn't hold a trial during a Passover season. I mean, truly, it's one of many, you could say, dozen illegal things that were happening in this season. I mean, it truly was no trial. It was a travesty of justice. But after meeting with the high priest and forming the Sanhedrin together, the Sanhedrin kind of functioned like a Supreme Court. It was a governing body. And they rubber stamped their decision. They wanted to execute Jesus. They sentenced him to be crucified. The challenge was they didn't have the power to execute a prisoner. You see, the Jews weren't in charge. Instead, the Romans were still in charge at the time, and they weren't allowed to crucify a prisoner without the Romans giving the permission to do so. And so he was eventually sent from Caiaphas' palace to Herod's palace. Today, in today's term, Herod's palace is no longer standing, but as tradition holds, Herod's palace would have been in this area. And as Jesus went to Herod's palace, he stood trial in front of the Roman governing authorities, in front of a guy by the name of Pilate, then to Herod himself, and then back to Pilate. It was a whole series of trials that many times Pilate actually tried to release Jesus, but eventually tried to appeal to the pity of the crowd. And so he had Jesus beaten up by these Roman soldiers that had been trained to use their fists as weapons. He eventually sentenced Jesus to be flogged, which was this horrific season of torture. Jesus would have been beaten up so badly, he would have been unrecognizable, probably hardly able to stand. What we know now is many times prisoners didn't even make it to a cross because they died during the flogging. It was so severe. But nevertheless, what the Romans decided to do was to crucify Jesus. As they put this purple robe on him, they eventually fashioned a crown of thorns. They put it on his head to mock him as a king, and they sentenced him to be crucified. Following the trials, Jesus was forced to make a walk from the trials ultimately to the place that he was crucified. That journey is now marked right here in the old city of Jerusalem, and it's called the Via Dolorosa. It's basically the road of sorrow. That journey starts right here at this particular church and meanders through the city, ultimately the place where Jesus was crucified. And on this journey, this Via Dolorosa, there are moments to stop and reflect, 14 different stations. Many faith traditions call them the stations of the cross. And though the Via Dolorosa now in the modern day times are full of shops and different souvenir places and restaurants, there are all kinds of moments to stop and reflect of all the things that Jesus experienced on this road. For example, moments like Jesus was forced to carry the crossbeam of the cross, the Via Dolorosa. It's a beautiful journey, a reflective journey of the very difficult journey of sorrow that Jesus took. While walking the Via Dolorosa, there's a small section of road, the road that I'm standing on right now, where there were some stones that were found in an archaeological dig some 3 meters below where I'm standing. These stones were brought to the surface, but the significance of these stones is they date back to the time period that Jesus was alive walking the city. So if in fact we are standing on the true Via Dolorosa, it's very possible that Jesus literally walked on these stones. This is the spot on the Via Dolorosa. They commemorate the moment where Jesus buckled under the weight of the crossbeam of the cross he was carrying. Most scholars think that crossbeam weighed about 75 pounds, and it's not surprising that Jesus' body buckled because he'd been tortured physically so horribly the night before that his body just couldn't take it. It was at that moment that they pulled a guy out of the crowd, a guy by the name of Simon of Cyrene, and he was the one that carried the cross the rest of the way. But if you look just a little bit further down, you'll see a place that, as tradition holds, is the place that Jesus put his hand to brace his fall. And pilgrims over hundreds of years have placed their hand in this same spot, kind of making a greater indentation to the wall. But it was a moment on the Via Dolorosa. Now, Scripture tells us that Jesus was crucified on a mountain that they called Golgotha, which literally means the place of the skull. Now, it could have been called that because a lot of people were executed here, so there's a lot of death and skulls, or it could have been that because some suggest that the mountain was shaped, if you use your imagination, it looked a little bit like a skull. Now, there's a couple of places that people think could have been Golgotha. One's about a third of the mile north of here. The other is actually right behind me. Tradition holds that this building that's now known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre now houses the site where Jesus was crucified and eventually buried nearby. If you were to go inside the Church of the Sepulchre, you will find the place that potentially he was pinned to that tree. If you think about the moment of the cross, there was a charge that was placed on the top of the cross that simply read, "Jesus, King of the Jews." It wasn't really a charge. It was just the truth. But it was here. It was here that Jesus was pinned with the arms stretched out, and that his arms were stretched out for his love for you and me. I mean, it's here. It was here that Jesus took on the sin of all humanity. You see, the divine pair had a deal, and Jesus was held personally responsible for every sin that had ever been committed of all time. In many ways, it was here that Jesus put death to death. Death to your addiction, death to the sorrow and pain, death to hardship and hurting. He put death to death so that one day we'd be able to experience new life, in a sense, a resurrection. It's kind of surreal to be here. The place where God did his single greatest work in all of human history. For my life, and for your life. I mean, what if it's true? I mean, what if it's true that at the end of the Via Dolorosa, at the end of the road of sorrow, death was put to death so that you and I could experience hope and new life? You know, Scripture records that when Jesus was crucified, there was this war-hardened Roman centurion that said, "Surely this is the Son of God." What if? What if that's actually true? What if you and I also made the same declaration that surely he is the Son of God?